behalf of the School of the Freudian Letter UK, I would like to welcome you all. My name is Marinos Maliali. I'm a member of the School of the Freudian Letter and an analyst in formation. I will be your host for tonight's event entitled Polemics Around the Question of Gender. Adam and Eve do not exist. This is the part 2 of the series. In tonight's event, Spyros Zenios, psychologist, researcher, and analyst in formation, will be conducting the interview with questions regarding the polemics around the question of gender. This part of the series aims at examining in detail the APA manual in relation to the treatment and approach of psychologists towards trans individuals. We will give the floor to Spyros Zenios, and Spyro, you may start your questions. Welcome, Spyro. Welcome, Petro.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Spyro, you may start.
As Marinos mentioned, today we're going to focus on the APA treatment on transgender people. Okay, my first question is, after reading the APA manual, I noticed that, as you can see, there is a treatment on transgenderism. And I was wondering if it's okay for the people, the trans people, why do APA list it as on the category that needs treatment?
If it's okay, you mean? If it's
functional for them, or because it's generalized, like a special treatment for them.
Yes. There are two, maybe more reasons for that. One was the person who was heavily involved into the trans question, even called it a transgender disorder before. He was a Canadian psychologist whose name was Zucker, whose methods, according to trans movement, are conflictual. According, however, to some studies, he had a percentage of dealing with kids claiming that they are trans. Some studies say 98%, some studies say 80, 70. It was something that was quite successful in his time. So he insisted, because he was involved in I think in DSM-4, I'm not sure about 5, and they wanted to remove the wording because of activism, even from back then. But he said if we removed it, there will not be anything to offer support to trans individuals. Another view that I spoke with some people is that if it is not listed somewhere in medicine, let's say, or psychology or psychiatry, they are not going to be able to, for free healthcare, especially in countries like United States and stuff, or with insurance. There would be a kind of complication with insurance. But also, if you noticed, the way it is listed in the last DSM, it is called just gender dysphoria, and it is not called something on the lines of the disorder. Also, if you mention the way the manual, I'm sure you will ask me more questions, but the manual of the APA is written. It is written, for example, it doesn't use the word transgenderism, even though there is nothing with the word, because it was used by anti-trans groups. It is considered that the use of the word transgenderism, it is anti-trans itself. So if you pay attention to the word of the APA, into the structure of the document, they use words, all the words that the trans movement, all the word association for trans people is using. Cisgender, trans, all these pronouns and stuff. And the way it is written, it is a way, it is like a holy book of how psychologists should approach and speak and consider the trans question. There is nothing about disorder there. So it makes me wonder of the role of the psychologists, because we're not talking about psychotherapists here. We're not talking about psychoanalysts here. We're talking about psychologists, educational, whatever, probably clinical psychologists or psychologists to the standard that the United States are setting. And if they are not approaching these people in a clinical way, then what is the reason? I understand your question. What is the reason for these changes? If you read closely between the lines, or even without between the lines, what is applied there? It's something on the side of the human rights to support this group that has whose rights and healthcare or whatever they cite there has been violated, and they urge the psychologists to take a position, of course, of affirmation to support those specific people, how to speak to them, what pronouns to use. There is even a section says even to discuss with them the treatment plan. For no any other listing in the DSM, they don't say to the psychiatrist or the psychologist to discuss with the patient or the client. I don't even know if it's a patient in this setting, the way they discuss it. There's no other diagnosis or case in the DSM where they discuss with they ask the opinion actually of the client, of the patient, I don't know how they call them now, for how to proceed. So what they write there, even though you think the trans people are okay, well, they are not okay, but what they are doing there there isn't anything contradictory to what the trans movement says. It's a manual that is in favor and support of the trans movement. That's not bad by itself, but it's very contradictory to the standards of how they practice their psychology. They don't do this special treatment with any other listing in the book. So I will pause here because to hear your next question.
Okay, the next question has a lot of sub-questions inside. I have question on the question.
No problem.
So, because many trans people experience anti-trans prejudice or discrimination, psychologists are encouraged to ensure that their work settings are welcoming and respectful towards trans people, and to be mindful of what trans people may perceive as unwelcoming. To do so, the APA suggests that psychologists may educate themselves about the many ways that cisgender privilege and anti-trans prejudice may be expressed. Okay. My first question, why? Okay, I'll go.
Let me just give you some comments on that. First of all, you pay attention to the binaries used. It gives a privilege to the cisgender people and to what they call them cisgender. For me, in my opinion, maybe I may have been called racist for that, but for me, I don't call people cisgender and transgender. It's people like a woman, and there's the trans woman. I'm not going to change what it is. If you want to be a trans woman, you can be a trans woman, but don't call the other woman cis woman. It's a woman. So that's my maybe small island mentality. Okay, but I can back it up with anybody who wants to discuss it. Okay, so you've got immediately you've got the research that suggests that there is systemic racism. Okay, systemic racism, it means, and actually this research is about there is the country is racist, there is all these problems, whatever. There are problems, of course, especially in all European countries, but you cannot claim, for example, that European countries or United States are systemically racist. Systemically racist, it means that if you go through the law, you cannot find your right. Okay, there is a structure that you can find your right. I'm not talking only about the trans, but about everybody. So they assume because of certain research done there, okay, the research shows that there is racism against these people, whatever, there is discrimination, there is whatever. I'm not saying there isn't. So we have to take a position as psychologists to reconsider that. But because they don't do the dual diagnosis that a lot of psychoanalysts do, they cannot say, for example, in our practice, we have a lot of people that they constantly feel threatened and persecuted. It's very typical when someone is identifying with the rejected object and they're trying to stabilize themselves. Okay? And their fantasy, it's one of structuring themselves with a constant adversary. This is one of my issues with the trans movement and the trans psychologists and the psychologists who support trans, is that even with APA, they construct that manual considering that there is an adversary. Let's, for example, when we do psychoanalysis to somebody, we're actually trying to remove them from that triangle with the adversary and feel okay with themselves regardless of what the adversary says. Okay? Let me give you an example. I'm going to an extreme now. Think, all of you, the audience, that someone is in love with you. I will use you, Spyro. Let's say, not you. Let's use, I don't know who to use. Somebody. Let's call Nick. Somebody who's called Nick. Nick is really in love with Maria. Really, really in love. Maria doesn't love him. She considers him a good friend, but she's not in love with him. But he's crazy about her. He's so crazy that he does this whatever things and even tells her that I don't want to be friends with you. And I want you to hear that as a psychoanalyst. This is what I'm saying. And because Maria says to him, I'm not interested about you, after 3 days, he commits suicide. Okay? Keep this in mind. The second point is that a lot of the practice of psychiatry, when someone is unstable, and I'm not implying here that, these people are unstable or whatever, but when someone is unstable, maybe he beats his wife, he cheats, he does all this stuff, and finally they go to the psychiatrist, and the wife says, I'm so tired, I want to leave him. The psychiatrist says, well, he needs you, we need to support him now. The psychiatrist there thinks of the structure of the situation, what will be better for the patient, but he doesn't really think of that woman. I encountered that probably 100 times when I cooperated with a psychiatrist. So if the earlier person I said commits suicide, are we going to blame the Marias or the Maria because of what happened? Okay. Maria said no. Okay. Maria said no. So there are cases where trans people, they are under attack. I know that because I had about 80, which is quite a big number. I had 80 in analysis. Some of them transition, some of them not. Okay. So, and in most of them, there was this structure of someone, even someone is haunting me constantly. There was this reference to someone is attacking them. So this is the structure this manual was constructed, that there is constantly a reference to an adversary. Someone is attacking them. So what are we going to do? Are we going to fix the Marias of the world? We cannot do that. They are not to blame. Of course, when there is violence, we stop violence, even if it's towards me, towards trans, towards a boy. It's a legal thing, we stop violence. There's no question about that. But we cannot blame even statistics, for example, that they are used, same statistics, for example, from Sweden, they are used both by anti-trans movements and trans movement. The first they say, oh, but they have like 41% suicide rate. That's true, that's what the statistics show. But then the others say it's because of the society. I mean, you cannot find an edge with these arguments. But what I believe is that if I, with the people that I have in my analysis, I orient the treatment so they can be free from the dependency of the other, of this other that they are hanging from them, and from whose signifiers they take their subjectivity. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I had a lot in my mind, but if you can repeat it if you want. Or you can go to the second one.
Actually, you answered to my question.
Okay.
But there are sub-questions in it. One main question, why, you said something about it, but I would like to hear more. Why they call it cisgender, and why they said they are privileged? Like I said before, psychologists may educate themselves about the many ways that cisgender privilege and anti-trans prejudice may be expressed. It's like I don't know, saying to them to become that cisgender straight people are privileged, so they become too. Why do it's
well,
too
there is the assumption that people who are not in minorities. It is about minorities. I spoke with a professor, a friend of mine of psychology in the UK, and my argument. I mean, of course, he didn't like it, but we are friends. I told him I believe that the trans associations shouldn't be one with the gays and lesbian associations, the homosexual, the LGBT, whatever. Because they keep adding letters, and they started having conflicts themselves. And this will, the more they get bigger, and the more they get, let's say, standardized certain demands that they have, they will start fighting with themselves. It's already started. The feminists, they fight with trans women. So they start from the presupposition that the cisgender people are privileged. Well, I don't know if there's any privilege, because the whole structure of civilization was built on that. Okay? So it is different to say that they are privileged, which is, by the way, the same stories that they started now with other movements in the United States. And then, of course, anything coming from the United States is like McDonald's. It becomes a branding, and then we've got the quality of McDonald's. Even Freud said that. Not about McDonald's, but he was afraid that they would turn psychoanalysis into something else, and they did. So when you start from that presupposition, you've got a triangle of the psychologist, the cis people, whatever, the people who are not trans, let's call them like that they are privileged or even offensive towards the trans people. So immediately you create a specific position from the psychologist to assist these very vulnerable people and treat it differently. So with this, where is the clinical work here? What are they trying to diagnose? What are they going to do? I will accept that if it's on the side of counseling. I will accept that on the side of coaching, life coaching, of mentoring. But clinical psychology, have you ever heard, you are a psychologist, have you ever heard of any other treatment in this way? Okay, so they also take a position, for example, if a black man wants to become a trans woman, they have to, it's in the manual, they have to speak to this black man, the black man who wants to become, to identify as a black trans woman, that the statistics show that racism is even more with black. You have the racism of being black, but the racism of being trans also. They don't really help with these things. If there is racism or if there is bullying, I say that in a lot of my lectures, if there is bullying in school, we don't need to over-educate the society. If there is a bullying in school, it means that the principal of the school is a fucking idiot. Because there are laws, you have to do something about it. Or have to educate and educate. There are laws, just use them. People who don't understand that, they have to deal with the law. Of course, you keep the education part of it, but I went every time I saw a weak principal or a weak manager of a school, they always talk about the need to educate the parents. But you are the principal of the school. There are rules and laws. So something like that. I mean, I say a lot of things. I don't know if I answer your question. If not, ask me again. I apologize.
It's okay. We move to the next question.
I'm trying to answer on the level of the structure and show the contradictions. And there are a lot of contradictions in that manual.
Okay. One thing that concerned me about this topic is that they urge psychologists to learn how other treatments went, so they make settings on how to treat these people. This for me sounded like they want to make manual that will work for anyone. Can they notice themselves that each person is different? I mean, like they use words like settings, manual. It's like
Yes.
a computer.
I will tell you why is that. If you go to Canada, they started from there, and then some states in the United States, they ban all possible approaches for people or kids, even kids. My concern is kids, by the way, because with adults, they can do whatever they want. They can assume their responsibility. They're adults. So anything that you can ask a simple question, like Freud told us to use clarification questions, for example, is not allowed. You have to start with affirmation, and they tell you because anything else we did research and it's bad for trans kids. I'm in a debate for a month now with an Australian group of trans people, and they don't get it. I said, I'm not against the surgery. I'm not against anything. I'm not against testosterone blockers. It's not my job. By the way, 2-3 months ago, Karolinska Hospital in Sweden, they stopped all the treatments for kids, minors, with testosterone blockers and other stuff. And it took effect in 1st of April, and Finland followed that. So because of that, probably they will start using, as they call it, other non-invasive techniques. And why they did that, that's a parenthesis, because these two countries, they did their own research. Because, until 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there was very little research on trans people, especially on trans men, women that they wanted to become men. And then they evaluate all this research about the testosterone blockers, the pills, transition, surgery for minors. And this is what they found. They analyzed a lot of research. Bias results, not efficient research. Not very little evidence for the good they do. It's amazing. And that's one of the most important hospitals in Europe. Okay, it's affiliated with the Karolinska Institute, which is one of the best institutes in neurology. So they stopped it. Just as a parenthesis, tell me again your question. Just to.
Okay, the other part of the question was.
Yeah.
Why
sorry.
They use
affirmation
settings.
I heard a psychologist in Canada who was anti-trans. Okay, he had his own arguments. For example, and he mentioned 12 studies, big studies that they showed that with a method that they call the watchful waiting. It was pioneered a bit more by Zucker. They had, in some cases, 98% of the kids, until they reach puberty, they identify with their body. Okay, they didn't say, I want to be a girl, I want to be a boy, or if there was a girl, they wanted to. And only 2% persisted, or some cases they saw 80%. So the minimum of the studies was about 75%, I think, which is a big percentage. And so they accuse, he accepted a lot of attack for his move. That's what they do, the activists. They try to find something that will darken you in the public eye. They push then the universities for that. They have people outside your business, whatever. And at the end of the day, Zucker and the clinic in Canada closed down. If you ask the activists, they will tell you that he was a pedophile, blah, 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 blah. None of these accusations was true. And actually, I think it was last year, Zucker won the case in the Canadian court, and they gave him, I think it was $650,000 plus tax, plus whatever other stuff. And they had to issue an announcement that the assessment that they did for his practice was biased. But they said they are not going to cooperate with him. So what is affirmation? In the initial Dutch protocol that I think it was 2007, I think it was forgot his name, was an American pediatrician. He went in a congress in Netherlands. In Netherlands and Europe in general, they are more involved and bit ahead than United States. So he saw that, and as a typical American, he saw a potential in business with it. So he opened the first trans pediatrician trans clinic. What he did, he imported what is called the trans protocol, which had 3 ways of intervening. I'm not going to go to the third one, but the 2 of them was affirmation, but the other one was investigation. To investigate why the child, and this is what I'm advocating. I mean, I'm advocating regardless of transitioning or not, okay? Investigate the child's claim in its context. And they tell me this is not scientific proof evidence, but actually this is scientific because I want to know not the objective truth, but the subjective truth. Okay, affirmation, it's a method that they use for gay people, and they try to make them straight. So that method, it was for that, but they interpret, the activists and certain psychologists and even doctors, they try to interpret any attempt that is not medicalization of kids to turn it, any attempt to have a conversation. And this is what Eric Laurent said, there is no space for interpretation. They turn it into affirmation, so they make it illegal. However, if you read the Canadian law, psychoanalysis and psychoanalytic psychotherapy, they found their ways to be excluded from the law. But what happened? A lot of psychologists, even that they are anti-trans, they say they allowed all this ancient stuff and they don't allow evidence-proof approaches. So if you pay attention to the word used by the activists or trans associations, the structure of their discourse is very similar to the anti-trans. Both they are anti-psychoanalytic, especially Lacanian psychoanalysis, who is an orientation who doesn't take a position and he wants to find your own subjective truth. And that's why it is called, for Lacan, it's a science, because it tries to find your subjective truth, not an objective truth, what Lacan called the universal. So that's a big problem with this ban on different other approaches. I understand the affirmative therapies that you are pushing because they were used by extreme groups or fanatic Christians or whatever. There was one was called even abuse therapy, but it was stopped in the 70s, I think. But to analyze the context of the child, conscious and unconscious, okay, it will make only good. Why? I mean, I don't have evidence for that, but I have the evidence of my practice. I don't have these researchers and statistics. Because even if the child says, I want to be, let's say it's a boy, I want to be a girl, because of this investigation, his demand will have more of a solid ground because of this investigation happened. He will choose the price to be paid. Sometimes they do that consciously. So it will have more validity because he or she have investigated their context, okay, and they made a choice. We don't have to push them in any direction. And even this, what I'm saying now, in my conversations with trans organizations and activists, I constantly, because they don't have anything to say, they told me, prove it, bring the evidence. That's what they do. And you think that the evidence are against them, they are not. For example, if you see research in psychology, most of it is pro-trans. I mean, they would tell you that, it's whatever they say, that a man with a penis can be a woman, it's there. Or with endocrinology. In 2007, for example, there was the first year, 2007 or 2009, I'm not sure. But there was this 10 group of endocrinologists that it was by the American Endocrinology Association. They told them that they accepted a lot of pressure from activists about the trans health. Okay. So they put this team together from 6 Dutch people from Netherlands and 4 Americans. They chose 6 Dutch people because they had more experience with these things. And they put together 22 guidelines. not to tell you more stuff, but there was this, I think it still is, the World Association of Transgender People, that you could be a member in that association just by buying a lollipop. Anybody could be a member. And they have these trainings about doctors, have trainings about everybody. And everybody involved, a lot of doctors, they say, well, I was trained there. It's nothing, this association. So these 10 people, they put together these 22 suggestions about trans people. And in science, in endocrinology, I think in other sciences also, they grade them from 1 to 4. I think it's 1 is no evidence, and 4 it's a lot of evidence. 2 it's really little evidence, and moderate evidence is number 3. From the 19th suggestions that they have there to create this manual, 19 of them were no evidence or very, very little evidence, and only 3 of them they have moderate evidence. In 2018, they added another guideline which had moderate evidence. And even though none of the 23 supported by strong scientific evidence, even as we speak, or to be more correctly, even until 2018 or 19, that was the manual that they suggested, and they force, in quotes, force all the endocrinologists in the United States to follow, because you lose your license. So this is what is happening here. You have 10 people that they decide for how psychological treatment should be done. So when they tell you about science says that, go and investigate even further stuff. So I just gave you this example with endocrinologists to tell you that the procedures that they happen there, even with their own standards of science, they were not correct. 2 of the 10 actually were students of, I think it was Dr. Wright, this guy in the 50s or 60s who was like pedophile, and anyway, and he's Dr. White, I think. His research is used both, surprisingly, by anti-trans and by trans, but each group interprets his own research differently. Okay, he was a really bad clinician, and even though his methods were rejected, the language he used is what we have today, this gender identity, gender this, gender that. He put it into, he was a psychologist, I think. He put it, into the mainstream or into the associations. Okay, so when you talk about affirmations, they assume that, I think they have it there in the statement, that the lack of familiarity with trans affirmative care, they assume that psychologists, they don't know that we have to make always affirmative care, which is one extreme. The other extreme is conversion. And they don't allow for anything else, like just to talk, just to investigate, to ask simple questions. So you've got only one option, to affirm. But if you affirm, what sort of psychology you are? It's not a disorder. I'm thinking as a psychologist. It's not a disorder. I have only to affirm and suggest these people to go to specific clinics and treatments. And we have the example of this Scottish woman, her video is online, who wanted to transition. She also said she had a lot of issues with alcoholism and stuff. I'm not going to go into that. But she decided to do transition. And she went to the service that they have, and she called she kind of cursed the counselor and psychologist, because she says, I want to do transition. I feel that, I made a terrible mistake with taking testosterone and all this stuff and mastectomies. And I think I feel more comfortable. I thought about it a lot, and to being back to be a woman. And she said that they told her, why you said you are a woman? Maybe you are non-binary. And she says to her, well, for me, non-binary doesn't exist. It's a man or a woman. And she says that they were trying, that's a Scottish counselor, they were trying to convince her that she's non-binary. So this is a brainwash that we see in this 33-page document. But in the training of psychologists, even if you want to transition, they use the trans language to convince you sometimes that maybe you are not binary. It's not even what you feel you are. It starts with that feeling, which, by the way, no other and nothing else in the DSM starts with a feeling. They don't care about feelings. And you are not. I said the other time, the pediatricians association in the United States, which as Americans they are silly. I find British more, have better humor and less contradictory, and they are less contradictory in their statement. They totally push for do not say anything. You refer them to transitioning as soon as possible. You affirm their gender as soon as possible. And on the other hand, in the same year, they issue a statement that you have to speak to teenagers and young people and their parents about tattoos and piercing because tattoos are forever. And they don't consider that what they are pushing, like this transition and surgery and the medication, are also forever. Like you cannot change your voice back, for example. Okay. So I just want to show you some of the more of the contradictions there. Anyway, let's go to the next question because, yeah.
Okay, the next one is I notice general with psychology, even before I got into the psychoanalytic context, I saw that it's like they exclude the context of each subject during the treatment and they process to a universal model and therapy, especially now with the trans people, but this happens universally.
Listen, as psychoanalysts, we can think that the trans question shows the bad structure that American psychology, because it starts from there, their influence all over the world, and psychiatry, because they excluded what psychoanalysis offer, especially Lacanian psychoanalysis, investigation, okay, of each context. They of course, that they isolate the context to get the symptom, measure it, blah, blah, blah. So because they have been doing that for years, now you've got a demand that is not solved with the usual practice. What is the usual structure there? You go to psychologists, if they cannot help you with CBT or this systemic or this other bullshit that they are doing, sometimes they help. But if they don't work, the next thing they do, they don't work. Why? Because they try to manipulate the signifier. They try to manipulate your head. How? It's you, me as a patient, and what is the third point of the triangle? The book. They are trained so they can be prophets or priests of that book. So if they don't succeed anything with logic or the manipulation to normalize me or to remove me from abnormality according to those standards, then they refer you to a psychiatrist. The medication, what happens? Okay, so of course, some people, if they want to remove their symptoms, they are fine. I'm not against medication. You know that for sure. But in this case with the trans, none of the two functions. Because if you use CBT or any other methods, you are going to be considered affirmative. Or that you are trying to change their gender as they did with the gay people in the 70s, whatever. If you use a medication, you are going to consider the meal. So none of the two tools of American psychology is working. But because they don't just deny, they foreclose psychoanalysis, they don't have any other way than to use this stupidity, this document that they have there, and to turn the psychologist as a supportive coach. I'm not saying anything against trans people here, just about the psychologists. If you see how they operate with the trans people, it shows the failure of the structure of both psychiatry and psychology. And there is a failure because they foreclosed than dimension brought in by psychoanalysis, and that is to explore, as Lacan said in Psychosis, the unique solution. In order to have a unique solution, you need to understand the unique context, the unique structure, the unique, as I say, mental geography of each person. Okay? In one of the responses I got with the president of a group of trans activists in a specific country, very knowledgeable individual, he has my respect for that. He told me, well, they told me, or she, well, I mean, I wouldn't mind calling him they if we are together, but in a public conversation, I refuse to call anybody with these stupid pronouns. Okay, so if he looks like a woman or whatever, he's a woman, I would call him she, but he's a he. Anyway, so that's in public debates. I never call him with his pronoun. Okay, so, but I was always polite. He actually is not angry with me. He got angry one time. When I say that his arguments are the poor man's arguments, he didn't like that, but it's an expression. Anyway, what I was telling you before that? What was the question?
The exclusion of the context of each subject.
Yeah. He kind of agreed with that, but he wanted evidence, and he says, one of the ways to repart my claim, because if you bring the context in, then the committees of the activists, that it's funny, but the committees of the activists, they supported the World Health Organization of doctors for the transgender medical staff. They were advised by activists. It was only in the second committee, 6-7 years later, that in the committee of suggesting some changes to them, doctors were included. Just to understand, that is not really pure science, as they call it. So he tried to repass my claim by saying that will need time. Can you prove how many sessions we need for that? Because it would be costly. And then they gave me this stupid parallel that if I had a problem with my leg, I would do surgery, because if I wait, I will lose it. I mean, you understand, they try to make the trans issue a bodily part, because they try to prove that it's biological, which is very stupid, the way they try to do this to compare metaphors there. Because they didn't have an argument in what I'm saying. Because it's actually very human. It will actually cost less in the, let's say, in the NHS in the UK. Because in Ireland, they try all the ways, not about the trans, about depression, when depression was in fashion. They try all the standards of the Americans because they thought they would reduce their budget. And actually, they were spending, I think it was 12 billions, was in Ireland. And then they start thinking in terms of, okay, maybe we should bring psychotherapies in, because we try this model of the Americans, and it doesn't work. This will not work also. And as I said, Sweden and Finland, two of the most open-minded countries, especially Sweden, that they have a long history with dealing with trans people. They stopped medicalisation for kids. They stopped these protocols. Okay, so yeah, that's my answer. Maybe you can say more. Let's go to the next question.